Hello, community! Welcome to our third class trio reveal. How are y'all doing? Let me know you can hear me. No, printer lot is not the next third class reveal. You hear me? Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Mark. I know you're all very excited, so here you go.
Well, guys, happy Friday, everyone. It's another really good Friday because not only are we revealing the third class trio, but this morning we completed a stretch goal.
Yay! Thanks, everyone.
Yay! So, thanks, as always, especially to you stealthers out there. You got what you wanted. You got what you've been asking for even before the Kickstarter.
So you have to say it.
What?
Stealth confirmed.
Do I have to? Stealth confirmed. Do I have to say that with more passion?
Yes.
Okay. Stealth is... What am I supposed to say? Stealth confirmed. Obviously, we're excited about it, folks. We've said right from the beginning that we wanted to see stealth in the game, but it had to be the right kind of stealth. And based on the conversations we've had on the forums, in chat, feedback I've gotten, the vast majority of you think that we're moving in the right direction, and frankly, that's good enough for now. So, stealth again, confirmed. This new stretch goal is also an important one. Actually, in some ways, even more important than stealth. And that is the Send More Programmers goal. What we're looking to do here is add 2 additional programmers, mid-level, not senior folks, to the team. Why is this more important than stealth? Well, it's more important than stealth for one very important reason. It, again, is a confirmation of how we are going to do things here at CSE with Camelot Unchained. You know, we have always said we will be good as our word, as our foundational principles, etc. And in foundational principle 15, we talked about stretch goals and not constantly adding new and bigger and better features to try to make more and more money and also push out the game's release date. Certainly we could have done that. Would have been really easy to do that. But we said we weren't going to. And just as I announced last week, well, this stretch goal and all future stretch goals, until we get locked in, we'll be hiring stretch goals. That's why it's more important. Because it, I hope, confirms again for you folks that we started this project the right way, we've continued to work on it the right way, and we will continue to work on it the right way going forward. That's why it's more important. So, PK, it's not that I don't love stealth, but this is an important, I believe, and I know, I don't even believe, I know it's an important stretch goal for our backers to see that we will stick to what we have said. Even though we've done it again and again, it never hurts. So, this stretch goal, we hope will bring in 2 mid-level programmers. These folks are supposed to be here for one reason only: to help deliver the game faster than our current, internal release date, but while maintaining all features and quality that we have talked about so far. We are not looking to speed up the game by cutting out things. That's a no-win for us. We are only looking to bring in, sorry, power just fluctuated. We are only looking to bring in folks to help speed up the delivery of the final game. So we've started already down that path, and we'll see what happens. So I think that's pretty much yeah, we are definitely fluctuating.
Oh my goodness.
So just a note that our building may be having another incident like it did
I hope not the same kind of
last
incident.
week, where the second and first floor below us flooded because a hot water heater exploded, apparently. But our power is fluctuating, so either we're about to get hit by a thermonuclear device,
They think aliens.
or aliens. But if we suddenly get cut off, you guys will know why. So, okay, on to the class review.
Yeah, stealth classes.
Stealth classes, right? Yeah, absolutely. No.
I don't know how that didn't happen for some reason.
Yeah, I'm really kind of surprised, but no, not stealth. The class trio that is the winner was A.
Okay, so I'm going to show you. Here's on the website. This is where you can find it. If you're on there right now, you can go under Camelot Unchained, down the tab to Classes. This is where you can see it. Here is the before silhouette. And, okay. And here is the after silhouette. Go ahead.
Okay, so as you can see, these are what we're calling our heavy fighters. Not because they're fat, but
Sorry, that's awful.
thank you. But because that is what they are. I mean, they are fighters that are not truly tanks in the sense of all they do is soak damage, but rather they're fighters whose role in combat is quite a bit more interesting than just sitting around as somebody's punching bag. Right, Ben?
Yeah, so these guys are on the defensive side, but that doesn't mean that that's all that they do, because if you had a traditional raid PvE style tank who just soaked up a bunch of damage and held aggro on monsters, you can't hold aggro on players, so that doesn't work. And if they don't do anything offensively, then there's really no incentive for you to attack that person, because you can just ignore them and kill off the whole rest of their group, and then they're just standing there waiting for you to kill them off last, and they have no meaningful contributions. So they really can't work that way. And those of you who've played other PvP games that have PvP focused tanks will probably be familiar with a lot of the mechanics that we're talking about.
Yeah, and that's the key. We've said from the beginning that we were going to take the tank role and make it important, useful, necessary in this game. And I think we've done that. I think we've done that with the concept of heavy fighters. So, if you look at all three of the classes, it follows what we've said from the beginning, that these folks, doesn't matter what class, are all going to be non-mirrored classes.
Yeah, so shall we go through and talk about each one
Yeah,
of them?
absolutely.
Right.
Let's start with letter A. We'll start with the Arthurians.
All right. So the Arthurian's heavy fighter is the Black Knight. He is probably the most traditional and straightforward of these characters. He is a frontline tank. He takes less damage from frontal attacks. He generally would probably want to carry around a big shield. He doesn't do a lot with magic, and he has a lot of capabilities to disrupt and also deal damage and protect his group mates. And a lot of the thematics of this are really just straightforward historical, even from the armor theming to the class basis and the lore Arthurian Black Knight character, not the Monty Python version.
No, not the Monty Python movie.
That
would be fun,
not that one.
But not that one. I mean, and this is a good example, as Ben has said, of taking the lore that already exists. And we've said that also from the get-go, that we want to take, the legends, the stories, and not just make up our own, but evolve them, change them to fit the world they're in. And the Black Knight actually is not just the Monty Python movie or the Black Knight seen in a lot of really bad Hollywood movies. The Black Knight in this case is a serious character, and he is a character that has been mentioned in the legends surrounding Camelot. So what better than to take that character, update it a little, and make it function within our world, again, not as a Monty Python character.
Yeah, and so there are obviously a lot of things that you can read now. If you click on that guy on the website, you can go through some of the samples for his abilities. Again, when we're talking about these are just samples. These are a few things here to get you some flavor for the class, to give you some ideas of some of the basic mechanics, and they will be built out more and to show you more of where we're going over time as we implement more of these and get them further into where we can actually test them out. If we want to move on to which one next?
Oh, let's just keep in the order that we have the sheets, right?
Just go right
Okay,
in the order.
the Fianna.
All right. So the Fianna is the Tuatha. Max, pronounce the tree guys faction. Yes, and so the difference is with this character, he's a lot more of an active regeneration tank, whereas the Black Knight is much more of a passive mitigation tank. So even though he has some passive regeneration built into him based on his armor, he also has a lot of abilities that help boost and maintain that regeneration and provide personal protection to himself through the use of active abilities. So he's going to have to be a lot more careful. He can't just like run up into the middle of a fight and expect to survive without using a lot of his active defenses, and that makes him have to be a lot more tactical in the way that he operates. Also, because these are all heavy fighters, they all sort of share the same general class rule, which means heavy disruption, group protection, and sort of providing that bulwark of the front line of your group to help keep everybody else alive around them.
And this is, again, another example of taking legends from Irish mythology. In this case, there was a Fianna that was led by a very famous Irish hero, whose name I will butcher by saying Fionn Mac Camail, which is as far away from a legitimate pronunciation as you could possibly find, which is also based, in this case, on actual bands of landless young men who roamed the land, sort of like almost the samurai of Ireland, where, they would go and work for different lords. So, these folks represent, again, taking both history, mythology, and our own twist, and even their motto, frankly, is pulled directly from, well, with maybe a slight change, depending on the translation, from the mythology. So, for those of you who are fans of Irish mythology, the TDD among you, these are not some, new crazy creation of ours. These are folks based on some, fairly important legends within the realm. And from that perspective, we think it's, obviously not only a win for the game, but for the fans of the IP and the original lore. We're treating them with a lot of respect, making them very important, and I think coming up with some pretty cool stuff, for them to do now and going forward.
I'm going to pencil in a rewrite for this class name to Irish Samurai.
Good. Good. That'll go over really well. All right, well, the last class, is one that I assume that almost all of our backers expected, because after all...
Maybe. They might have guessed wrong.
Well, they might have guessed wrong, but frankly, when you looked at what we did when we were talking about the warrior class, and that there was a path, of course, based on Mew Mew, how to say it, come on, Thor and all that, Mjolnir, that I think our backers would have pretty much absolutely expected we were going to find a way of bringing Mjolnir into the game. And I think we've done it in, again, an interesting way, and what I think will be a very fun way for our Vikings. Because after all, is it not the perfect motto for this class? Smash. I mean, look, don't need any fancy words. We're Vikings. Our motto, smash.
Yeah, and so, again, this is a class that goes back to the Drengr concept, which was back when we were doing a path system where you had a lot of different completely self-contained subpaths within a class. Now we've taken that path that was so strongly themed and made it into its own class. So a lot of that is a throwback to that document if you've already read it. But as its own class, it pretty much stands as it would have as a path of a class had we maintained the previous path model. And so this is another heavy fighter. He uses his hammer. He does crushing damage, which if you're not familiar with the basic physical damage types, there's crushing, piercing, slashing damage. Crushing damage is good against heavy armor, specifically because it doesn't have to penetrate armor to deal its full amount of damage. And that's also highly disruptive, so he will be good at dealing disruptive damage. He can throw his hammer, so he has a little bit of range, not archer range or mage range or anything, but he doesn't have to be right up close and deal direct melee damage. And he has some magic in there as well, so he has sort of a mix of that crushing physical damage and lightning damage, so he has a little bit more damage variety there to compensate for the different armor defenses that his targets have. So he has quite a bit of diversity that make him more than just the, run around and hit people sort of character. He doesn't have the same passive tank, and actually he has some penalties to his defense that make him have to do some active tanking. So his ability use is a lot of where he gets his defense as well. So he doesn't have the regeneration of the Tuatha, but he has some active defense that raises his mitigation so that he can gain defense based on offense, and so that he sort of follows that general Viking philosophy of being overtly offensive and just going out and attacking things. In the best defense is a good offense.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And, after all, having and getting to carry a piece of what destroyed the world and being called a Mjolnir is pretty cool. Because, again, tying into mythology, tying into Thor, tying into a really cool and one of the most, iconic weapons across all three realms is just for the win. So I think that pretty much sums it up for a quick
intro, and more information on the website, obviously, and
lots more information.
A lot of questions we might have about these
things. I think so. I think there'll be a few.
Yeah.
All right. Anything you want to add? Anything else?
I'm sure there's a lot of stuff we could add. We could talk about this. This melee combat in Camelot Unchained is going to be a huge topic of conversation that we could talk about all on its own as a subsystem. So I don't want to just talk along that for
right.
quite a while right now, because we're just specifically talking about these specific classes and their diversity and their role in the game. So let's just focus on that for right now. If there are any questions that delve into the intricacies of melee combat and the way that that system works, then we can certainly answer questions about it.
Okay, Max is going to slow the chat, and it's time for Q&A. So type your questions, and we'll pick some here in a second. Okay, how much CC will tanks get overall? Will they be the main CC control class? Will we see a Warhammer type stagger from Sacrix?
Oh, that's easy. No, they will not be the main crowd control class. They have some crowd control, but they are not the main CC class. Not at all.
Grease Monkey 3 asks, are the Thanes, he means Mjolnir, going to be able to summon lightning or giant hammers that smash everyone?
Mike loves it every time we bring up the giant... Mike Crossmeyer, for those of you who don't know, worked on Dark Age of Camelot and actually made the giant hammer from the sky effect. And it was meant to be a single target effect, and it got turned into a multi-target effect, so there were giant hammers everywhere. And he's never gotten over that, because he's very strongly against it. So I ask him to make a giant hammer effect every now and then, but he hasn't done it for me yet, so that may or may not go as a thing that he will let us create.
Elnis asks, have you given up on the dual shield concept?
Oh, no, not at all. This class obviously isn't a dual shield fighter. But again, look at what we're calling it. We're calling these guys heavy fighters for a reason. There will be other fighter types that will be revealed, probably not during these 10 reveals, but certainly afterward as we get to additional classes. I think the dual shield concept is still a cool concept. We want to pursue it, but just as we've said, as far as I've now said in this stream and other streams, we're not looking to put out more stretch goals for classes until we get locked in for release.
Yeah, we should point out here, this is another one of the confirmed classes for beta, for the launch of
Good
beta.
Point.
Which means that they have to be generalist enough to be able to cover the melee role in the game, just because they're going to be the only class that's doing that, really, to any large extent. I mean, archers and healers too can all sort of melee a bit, because that's just the way that the game is, but these are the melee specialists, and so it didn't make as much sense to go with that type of a character that was fully focused on that, because then there wouldn't be anybody doing melee damage. So there will be more specialists that go into more narrow roles later on, but right now this is a class that's firmly in the fighter category, that's going to be more of a general melee character.
And keep in mind, again, when we say heavy fighter, as Ben has mentioned a few times, disruption damage, but they also do regular damage as well. So it's not just about disrupting, enemy attacks. It's also being able to actually kill somebody, and do enough damage to somebody to harm them, not just disrupt them.
Butter Panda 888 asks, what sort of weapons would be wielded by each? The hammer is obviously thematic to the Mjolnir, and the Fianna get the wind spear. But can these classes wield other weapons? Which ones are best for each?
Well, certainly the weapons that we're showing with the characters are going to be their best weapons. Will they be able to use other weapons? Look, we've said right from the beginning that anybody can use anything. So no matter what, you'll be able to use other weapons as well. Will there be the equivalent of lines, or trees, whatever we call it, other than paths, if we get rid of paths, so they could use other weapons? Very possibly. But for right now, as Ben said, we want to get these guys in. We want to get them. We want to get them into beta, and we want to start focusing on them. So certainly the weapons that they will be using from the beginning is what you see us talking about and see up on the website as well.
Yeah, the Mjolnir is very hammer focused. He gets his diversity, as I was saying earlier, from that he also does lightning damage, so that compensates a little bit for the fact that he doesn't have a lot of weapon diversity. The Black Knight will probably have considerable weapon diversity because he's not locked in as heavily to a specific weapon type as that. The Fianna is kind of sort of an in-between of those, where he focuses a lot on slashing, piercing damage, not as much on crushing damage, but that he has some flexibility in there too. So we try not to lock people in as much as possible unless there's a strong, compelling reason to do so. And with some of these classes, there actually is, like the Mjolnir, who is very hammer themed, and so he sort of gets sort of a pass on the weapon diversity in order to go in a specific thematic direction. And as long as we have an alternate compensation for that, which is the fact that he has more than one damage type with lightning damage.
Exactly, and for beta, we want to get in really the minimum amount that we need to test.
Yeah.
This is not a minimum viable product. We're not saying that. But we want to get these things, like everything else we've said from the beginning, it's about laying the foundation, getting the foundation solid, and moving on. Getting these three, classes in, get their base weapons working right, get secondary things working, and then we can see where we want to go, whether it's, adding new weapons to them or moving on to another class.
Yep.
Following up on Ben's statement, Edgar asks a question about crush damage. Crush damage, does that have any type of bleed type ability or dot? I think they want to know what that is.
No. So crushing damage, of the three basic physical weapon types, or damage types, crushing damage doesn't have to penetrate armor to deal its full damage. It has relatively moderate damage but higher disruption. Piercing damage is good at penetrating armor, but if it doesn't penetrate, it does much less damage. And then slashing damage does high damage, but it has very low penetration and doesn't have very good disruption. So those are sort of your choices when you go with different weapons. And obviously weapons like a sword can deal piercing and slashing damage with different attacks, but something like a mace would just do crushing damage and wouldn't have that weapon diversity. Different types of pole arms have mixed damage types they can do with different sorts of attacks. So it depends on the weapon that you're using. It depends on the target that you're facing, if you think you can penetrate their armor or not. And so that diversity and those choices of both the weapon that you equip and the attacks that you're using is something that you'll really have to carefully consider. A lot of the bleeds and conditional based effects have a lot to do with penetrating the target's armor, because piercing and slashing damage obviously will make your target bleed. Crushing damage really won't. So that a lot of the status effects and negative debuffs and things are also dependent on those different damage types.
James Goodwin wants to know if tanks will have guard or something like the war style guard.
Oh, of course. I mean, part of the role of tanks, no matter whether we call them heavy fighters or not, will be to protect. It's not just about, going out and doing damage, of course.
Yeah, those sort of guard, protect, intercept, shield wall abilities are all things that we're going to work on prototyping. You probably won't see them functioning in exactly the same way that you've seen in other games, but a lot of the basic foundational philosophies behind those, of being able to protect your allies when they're getting focused and take damage and spread it amongst allies, and be able to provide a sort of frontline bulwark where people can hide behind you and you can soak the damage for them. All those are mechanics that will get worked into abilities in different ways for the different classes that are not mirrored, where it's just everybody gets guard. That's not a thing that we're doing. So there will be different ways that these classes go about accomplishing these same things.
And one of the good things about this game is because magic and projectiles are actually magic projectiles, right?
Mm-hmm.
That a lot of the functions that some abilities you carry out in other games are not necessary. Because how do you protect that mage from a fireball heading his way? Step in front of it. You know, you don't have to necessarily cast a magic spell or do anything to intercept that. You just have to stand there. And the same with arrows or other things that could be headed towards, you know, the coffee, the squishy, the whatever you're trying to protect. You simply stand in front of it.
Yeah.
You use your shield. You do other things. So there's going to be a very nice mixture of abilities and things you have to do actively to protect those folks, which is different than a lot of other games.
And because we have player collision, you can do that with players too.
Exactly.
Which is a lot of the way that some of these, not only the pure physics, but a lot of the abilities actually work to help provide blockers and things to keep enemy characters from reaching the characters that you're trying to protect.
Wellesley999 wants to know if the Fianna have the ability to affect the recovery of allies.
The recovery of allies. They're not healers. They don't get to spread their regeneration to other people. Their regeneration and their way of managing their health to keep themselves alive is a purely self-directed mechanic.
Action Pigeon, kind of following up on that, wants to know if tanks require support to be optimally effective, or are they self-sufficient? You were kind of talking about healing yourself as a Fianna.
Everyone in the game kind of works better with support. As far as the heavy fighters go, as like being a solo class, they would be pretty capable in a lot of instances. It depends a lot on your ability focus and on your equipment. You'll obviously be able to kit yourself out more as a heavily defensive character if you have other offensive characters that you're being able to group up with. But if you gear yourself out being really offensive, you wear lighter armor, you focus a lot on your agility and your ability to catch and attack people, there's a lot of other classes that you'll be good against. So you could potentially go out and be a character that solos as a heavy fighter.
And we were actually, Ben and I were discussing this, right before the stream. The real difference is between this game and PvE games with tanks. These guys need to be able to go out and not only work in groups, but they have to be able to, at least depending on how they're geared and spec'd, they have to be able to solo. They have to. You have to. These guys cannot simply be damage, soakers. They can't be sponges. They can't just, sit there and go kill me. These guys are going to have to be able to go out, whether it's in a group or do some soloing. Because we promised that, most of our classes, all of our classes, would have varying amounts of, not survivability in solo, but ease of success, I guess.
Yeah,
in
there's
solo.
there are certain things in your kit that you have to be a viable solo character, and some characters will have that and some of them won't. These ones do, but you don't have to. You shouldn't necessarily expect that every character will be able to do that. This one does, though.
Absolutely.
BBQ 1040S, will any race be able to play this class effectively, such as Lukerpan can play with more dexterity, while Fearball can play with more strength, and still both be effective?
Absolutely, because if you look at, Lukerpan, if the Lukerpan gets in front of that projectile, the projectile will still hit the Lukerpan. Now, on the other hand, a Lukerpan in heavy armor is just a fat Lukerpan, essentially. And they will get, with our physics, and physics-based attack, if that Fearbog decides to try to punt the Lukerpan, well, certainly the heavy armor on them will add some weight, but no, the Fearbog would be more successful at punting the Lukerpan than the Lukerpan would be at punting the Fearbog.
Yeah, you can get into some interesting race class combinations that might not be so good for some things all the time, but you also have to remember that there's not this huge gap in power and in progression and in stats that there are in these other games. So when you see, one character versus another character, the character differentiation is not that high, except that they have different passives and different banes and boons and different things that set them apart that way. And so the viability question of, could you just play a Lukerpan fighter? Yeah, you can. Just because the Lucapan is not all that much worse or better based on their stats than some other character is, they will just have different advantages and disadvantages that set them apart. Now, does that mean that they'll necessarily synergistically work as well in different roles and stuff? No, I mean, you can min-max anything, so it won't always be optimal to pick from the full range of races and expect that they'll all perform equally, because they won't.
Exactly.
And those inequalities mean that they are situationally going to have instances in which they are good or not as good.
Well, if you look at a Lucapan tank, for example, heavy fighter, with them being more agile, with them being able to move quicker, they might actually, in some ways, played, well, be very viable as solos, right?
Yeah.
Because when you're playing solo, you're not looking to stand up and protect the clothy behind you from the incoming guys who want to punt or hit, your clothies. That wouldn't be great, that's not probably a good role for that. But if you're going out there and you're looking to do some soloing and you're looking, to make some kills, whether against enemy crafters or even enemy, single enemies going out there, or even, 2-on-1s, depending on, who's out there, you can make a very strong argument that a Lucapan might be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Stern would like to know if the Mjolnir have any type of movement-based abilities.
I think there was even one built into their
Yeah.
passive. But yeah, there are movement enhancing abilities. We don't have a lot of abilities right now intended that are going to be like teleports or instant, the sort of charge abilities that are instant, where you get close enough in range and then you hit charge and then you're instantly on top of the person because it just animates over a half a second or something. Distance and positioning are important in this game, and so we don't want to allow for a lot of trivial mitigation of that. But movement-based abilities in that, something like charge, where you just run faster and can run up to your enemy or catch up to them, or catch somebody who's running away from you, or throw your hammer at somebody and slow them so that you can catch up to them. Yeah, they'll have those types of things because that's important for them to be able to have some gap closers, but they won't be trivial instant gap closers that just completely negate distance.
Jantron says, it seems a little like Arthurians get the straightforward classes or the more classical ones. Will this be the case for most of the classes?
I think so. I think most of the case that's true. A lot of
But not all of
the
them.
historical, medieval fantasy sort of characters do fall into the Arthurian realm, just because it's a lot of the typical European soldier type combat characters happen to fall under Arthurians. As with everything, there are clear and I think in this case very strong exceptions to this rule. But certainly a lot of them do.
A lot, not all.
Nepolis 2A asks, do the war cries of Fianna, are they influenced by the resonance stat?
I believe that is true, yes. I think all shouts actually have
Should be,
resonance
right?
based. Yeah.
Grumman wants to know, since some attacks can attack specific body parts, with shields, can you protect specific body parts?
Oh, absolutely. That's the point. If we're going to have body part targeting, you have to be able to try to protect those parts. So yes, of course.
This is kind of a bit more general question from Stir. How will you make heavy fighters enjoyable in large-scale PvP or keep sieges?
Oh, I think that's obvious.
Well, fighters, typically melee range characters always have a hard time with sieges that are long ranged, right? Because they don't have ranged abilities, or at least like very long ranged abilities like archers and mages. And a lot of the time they don't want to operate siege engines because that's going outside of their role, where they're a close range fighter and they don't want to do something that's not close range fighting. And so to some extent you're going to have those problems in any context. Whereas, once they get into the building, the problem reverses itself, where all the ranged classes have a super hard time because they're inside of close quarters and they can't do a lot of their long ranged abilities. So there's sort of a bit of a trade-off there, and I think a lot of where we don't have there isn't a resolution to this because it's just a tautology. But if the timing is such that you're not spending hours and hours and hours and hours player versus door, then you're not spending hours and hours and hours being bored as a fighter. So the time that it takes to get into a building, to get into those close quarters, part of the time you're not going to be able to do a whole lot because you're not at close quarters fighting. Part of the time you are going to be able to do a whole lot, but the guys who were doing a whole lot before in the long-ranged engagement are now in close range and can't do as much. So long as those times kind of balance out more, then you won't have as many problems with I'm just sitting around for hours waiting for the door to go down.
Well, but also don't keep in mind that part of the role of these guys in sieges is going to be to get to the door. There'll be traps, there'll be other things that'll be laid, by the defenders. And having, you don't want to call them meat shields in this case, but it may be actually quite true, to go through and help set those off, to find them, to be involved at that level, is also something they can do besides just sitting back waiting for the doors to open, right?
Yeah.
And then if you want to take it to the next level, and this is something we've only talked about a little bit here, is what could they do with crafters if we have crafters setting traps themselves, trying to set off bombs, do other things, where the tanks would be protecting, the heavy fighters would be protecting the crafters while they do certain things to try to bring down a piece of the wall or the door. So the key is to look at these guys and go, what is their primary focus? Well, the primary focus is obviously not knocking down doors in sieges. I mean, that's not what these guys are created for. On the other hand, we want all of our classes to be effective and certainly to be useful in all the major parts of this game, right? I mean, if you can't go out there and, romp through the woods in a small group, if you can't go out and romp in a large group, if you can't go out in a siege, if you can't defend in a siege at all other than just sitting there and being bored, we haven't done a very good job. And so all of them, every class we put forward is going to be able to do, I hope and I expect, everything that we consider important in the game. Some will be more effective, some will have, as Ben says, some downtimes where they won't be able to be quite as active. But I think what Ben laid out in terms of at one point they're not as effective or not having as much fun, and then when the situation changes, all of a sudden they become extremely important. I think that's a perfectly great balance.
Okay, shout out to you, Acolyte community, for your 200 plus backers for joining us. Thank you. Awesome. There's a lot of questions I'm going to compile together about the traditional taunt of a tank. Is there a way to make an enemy target swap to you or anything similar to that being used?
The traditional taunt, just to catch, I hope I understand the question, is just forcing an enemy to attack you, right? So you would do this in a PvE game where you can manipulate the monster's hate lists where it puts you at the top of it, and therefore the monster turns and attacks you and just does basic attacks against you instead of doing them to somebody else. That's not a thing you want to do to players because we don't want to force people's targets to change. And it would be a fairly heavy-handed form of crowd control if you could just take a bunch of people, force them to swap targets, and then force them to use attacks, even if you could pick the attacks that they did, or limit them to their targets so the only thing they could use attacks would be one person, is probably not a direction that we want to go. That said, being able to intercept attacks, as we've talked about, even just by physically standing in front of people, and even being able to do that with melee attacks. If you're standing next to someone and there's a sword swipe that would go through the physics of both of those characters, being able to prioritize yourself over the person that the attack was actually intended for is the type of thing that we can allow you to do.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and so things like that, things that work in a sort of similar way to the way you've seen taunts work in other PvP-based games where they have compelling the enemy to attack you but not forcing them to, so that like if they're attacking your ally and you taunt them, then they get a bonus for attacking you and a penalty for attacking the person that they were attacking. That sort of incentivizes them to change their target because it would be more beneficial for them to do so, but it doesn't force them to if they really don't want to. They just suffer a penalty because you've penalized them for doing something you don't want them to do, and you're a tanky character, and that's sort of your role, is making people not able to do the things that they want to be able to do. But trying to keep those in sort of a soft control sort of a way, so that it's not compulsive, so that it's not forced, so that it's not like a hard control.
And I think it's very important to, again, go back to the air system and think about interactions. So you can, of course, use a taunt in most games to force that player, that NPC or that NPC, to fire at you. In our game, let's take the Mjolnir for example. If there's an ability for him to use the hammer to attract magic, right? So since this game uses projectiles, or again, whether magical or arrows, that track, being able to pull one of these and put up an ability that essentially will pull attacks towards you, work even better than a taunt, because the target is still the target, and are you powerful enough to pull in attacks from other players. And that's when you also get to when you build your ability, how much tracking you can put on it. So maybe you have a fireball that only has slight tracking. Well, somebody who can counter by pulling it in is going to be able to deflect it more, right?
Sure.
But if you put a strong tracking element on your ability, maybe that ability, your ability to pull it in, doesn't work as well. So there are ways that you can accomplish, the same thing, which is to have a tank that can protect against incoming attacks, and we can do that, as both Ben and I have said, by just standing in the way. But there are other ways I think that we can do it and will do it that will also give players a little bit more choice than simply just standing there and getting hit and being lucky enough to get hit, depending if they position themselves right from the ability.
Kind of another combo question about tanks. Will they be able to climb and do damage to doors and walls?
Well,
Can they not? Boom, boom, boom. Hello.
Well, yes. I mean, the whole idea, of course, with our cube system is that each of the blocks can take damage. So, yes, a fighter can certainly damage blocks.
If you want to go and hit a block with your sword, you can. I'm probably not going to recommend it, but that physically supports that.
Well, but something like the hammer against, certain types of material might be effective.
Certain types of material is probably the key word there. If you're going to go start beating on stone blocks with your hammer, it's probably going to take you a while. You will probably want something that deals, siege damage that would be more effective against that. But wall climbing, something that we would like to have, I think.
Absolutely.
That's something contingent on animations and systems and being able to climb structures that are built by players that don't have a fixed point of ingress. That's something that we have to sort of figure out if we can do. But obviously wall climbing is something that goes way back as a mechanic for these sorts of characters. And even if we resort to placing ladders or having siege towers or something else, being able to not have to wait for the wall to fall down before you get inside of the structure, something that we want to be able to support.
And that's a big deal for this game. I mean, when it goes back to the siege question, with the ladders, with some kind of a climbing ability, these heavy fighters won't be just sitting out there, waiting for the door to open.
Action Pigeon asks, what anti-ranged abilities will the tanks have? Can they reflect spells or abilities to avoid damage while trying to close the gaps and avoid being hit?
A lot of that is shield dependent. Shields, for the game in general, shields are real good. So if you want to protect yourself against ranged attacks, a large range of physical attacks, even a small range of magical attacks, having a shield is really important. If you're going out with either two weapons or a two-handed weapon and you're expecting to defend yourself, you're probably going to just rely a heck of a lot more on your armor than you are on most of your active abilities in that case. But there are ways for you to defend yourself, but this is actually one of your weaknesses as a heavy fighter, is ranged attacks. Ranged physical attacks obviously will be protected against by your armor fairly well, and so you'll be able to deal with those fairly effectively, but magic attacks, you're not really better off than anybody else, because you can build the same magic defenses into your equipment that can be built into any class of equipment. So heavy armor isn't really any better than light armor, and in some cases light armor is actually better than heavy armor at resisting magical power. So one of your weaknesses as a fighter is range, and so if you can get up close to people, you'll be real good. If you're having to deal with them starting from really far away and you're just going to run at them, having a shield would be recommended, but it is just one of your weaker points.
But again, go back to the way our projectiles work. It's not as cut and dried, I think, as it would be in most games,
Sure.
right? Where
Yeah, because you
everything
can
fire
dodge
is
things a
gonna
little
hit.
bit, and
Exactly. And some of it from the certainly whether it's an archer or a mage, you're going to have to be smart. You just can't say, oh, I'm going to cast these 6 spells and all 6 will definitely hit no matter what, so I know I'm going to win. It's not going to work that way. So part of the survivability of these guys as they close is simply the fact that our abilities, our spells, our projectiles are not fire, automatic hit, automatic track, abilities that other games have.
Okay, I'm going to ask another question, but we're running out of questions based on heavy fighters. So if you want to ask some questions about the archer or the devout, I can throw some of them in there, or even the stretch goal, and I'll look at some of those to ask as well. So Riot LOL was pretty excited about you holding your hand up there like the Mjolnir, and wants to know if it's possible to reflect shots away, which is the opposite of pulling them towards you with that.
that would be the opposite physics impulse for that same effect. So that's a technical possibility. That's not an ability that I think I have on the list of them being
Not
able
yet.
to do. It's something that the air spells in the game can already do is push things, but that they sort of have a magnetism about them in their theme. They don't really have a repulsion as part of their concept, but it's not something that's impossible. So we'll see.
That's certainly something that when we go to the dual shield class, that
Yeah, if they
would
can-
have
if they
that.
can reflect
they
or
can
bounce
reflect
things.
as well.
Yeah.
Littlefinger, I have to. Will beer be useful for other classes than Abbott?
I don't know if I would say useful.
Yeah. Fun, maybe.
It's usable. You can drink it. It's not necessarily helpful to you in the same way that the abbot actually gets a benefit from.
Gravelord asks, are there more tanky tank classes to be revealed, or are these the toughest that we're seeing right now?
These are the toughest. I guess you'd have to say these are
We can say that out of the current set.
right.
Right.
Yeah, I think so.
Of the ones that we have not yet revealed, these guys are the most defensive, the most self-protective of these characters.
Butterpanda really wants to know what the Mjolnir's Thunderstrike is going to look like, and he keeps taunting Tyler to throw glitter and wave his arms around. But if someone would like to animate that for us, that seems to be a request that I'm getting.
I think we'll be able to get Scott to do that here at some point. But we
Hi,
haven't,
Scott.
we haven't done the animation. We have an animation request from a panda or something.
What does the Mjolnir Thunderstrike look like?
But yeah,
Do you want to do a Thunderstrike?
I don't.
That sounds like a visual effects.
It sounds like a visual effect.
The
Passing
animator
the
has
buck.
passed the
Way to
buck to the
pass the
visual
buck.
effects guy. So, not yet. These are all just conceptual designs. They have not been implemented in the game yet, and they're not even on our animation or VFX lists at this point, because we're still going through a lot of getting the remainder of these class abilities together that we'll have for our first pass for the list of beta classes. So, still a little bit early to have actual VFX and animations.
Helzish is asking a question about there's negative effects to wearing heavy armor despite being heavy fighters for the Fianna and the Mjolnir. Will there be boons that we haven't seen to encourage heavy armor, or is this just kind of the realm fighting style?
Oh no, there'll be more. There'll be other boons. I mean, again, as Ben has said, these are just sample banes and boons, sample death curses, DIs. Some of them, when they seem to fit perfectly, like the abbot, I think is safe. I think are pretty safe bets to make it in. But look, you guys have seen how many banes and boons we had concepts for. So part of what Ben and I are going to be doing over the next forever is looking at the banes and boons, looking at the DIs, the DCs, the abilities, and just keep making them better and better and more iconic and more interesting for the class. So again, what you're seeing now, these, I would consider these to be not the actual necessary abilities we'll have at launch, at beta, but representative of what we'll have. In other words, we may have some of these banes and boons, but we're pretty sure we won't have 10 each. We will have, a death curse, not necessarily this death curse.
Yeah, and to answer that question specifically, the disadvantages that some of the disadvantages that are listed in the banes of these classes are there specifically to make them have a gameplay style that's to compensate for that. For example, the Mjolnir as a boon has the Ride the Lightning, and that gives him some mitigation actively, but he has the Overcharge, which gives him a debuff basically for having heavy armor and using lightning abilities. So if you have a good heavy armor that goes high on armor class but low on mitigation, you can make up some of the mitigation by using the lightning abilities and having low feedback from them, but you have to manage the amount of lightning abilities that you use because you're taking damage feedback from them, so you have to make good trades with those effectively of like, it has to be worth it for me to use this, that I'm dealing considerably more damage than I'm dealing back to myself. Because you're supposed to be a tanky character who has a lot of defense, this is something that you can get away with a little bit more of than another class who might have a feedback mechanic that is not as heavily defensive. So there are reasons that these are in there, and if you read through some of these, hopefully you can spot some of the areas where that weakness makes sense for a strength that's somewhere else.
Alexis is asking for clarification if block is active or passive.
Block is active, deflection is passive. Deflection is basically a rate-limited block that reduces the damage of attack. It doesn't completely mitigate it. It's not just attack completely whiffs, but it's an event that happens on a rate limit based on the properties of the weapon. Block as an action is an ability that you would preload, so it would be like this ability will block the next physical attack against you within X seconds. And so if you want to block an ability, you would activate that, then the next time somebody tries to hit you, assuming they're hitting you from the front, that attack would be blocked. And so that's sort of the way that nuanced interaction works.
A number of questions about the Black Knight and if he must wear black, or if there's bonuses to black, or those questions.
Well, like anything else, and I think we've said this either the last one or the one before. We've encouraged people to dye, their clothing. We've said from the beginning there'll be a dyeing system. So, will they be encouraged to wear black because the only way they can get certain abilities is by wearing black? No. Again, dyeing system and all that. Now, should you be wearing black if you want to be like the hot fashion guy, for the Black Knight?
Clearly.
Yeah, clearly, yeah. See, we're wearing black. You should, but no, of course not. That would be, no. What would point of dyeing system be if, you have to wear black and you can't actually dye anything in the game because if you do, you won't be, useful anymore.
Yeah, following the theme is a lot of the times optional.
Will the Mjolnir's hammer be a spellbook, or will a Viking warrior need to be literate enough to have an actual spellbook?
No.
There's a lot of asking for hints on the CC things that stop you and how you could possibly mitigate that if you want to give them CC hints.
Can you ask an actual question?
What will a tank do against CC which stops them moving around?
So tanks have a lot of defense that reduces the power of abilities that are used against them. It doesn't necessarily stop that ability from affecting them, but it sometimes can make the ability less powerful, which means the reductions that would affect them are less severe, the durations of those abilities last less long, and they'll probably quite a bit of the time have active abilities that they can use to further increase that. So if they're getting a lot of things against them, I think the Black Knight actually already has one of these.
I thought it did.
Where he suspends the effects of the wounds against him effectively. So if he has a bunch of bad things that have happened to him, he can make those negated for a limited period of time and then go back to pretty close to full effectiveness, knowing that once that effect expires, those effects are going to resume on him. So being able to do things like that helps them out, and obviously having other classes to support them is another important thing. So if you're getting a lot of debuffs thrown at you and you can't get rid of them yourself because not everybody can do everything, having the other guy there who's a support class or who is a healer to get rid of those wounds and those debuffs to bring you up to full effectiveness, and even to throw additional buffs on you so that you do even better than normal, that's going to be a real good thing for you. So having that support and having that group interactions are ways that are going to help you probably more than anything to deal with those sort of negative effects.
But keep in mind, folks, that we've said from the beginning that this is not a game where you're going to be able to have almost an unlimited number of debuffs or buffs thrown at you. So, for those folks who are thinking of playing, these heavy fighters and worrying about, oh my God, I'm never going to be able to close because I'm going to get 10 debuffs on me that will reduce me to jelly, before I can even reach a target. That's not how this game works. We've been very clear there will be a limit. You will, and it'll be right now, a pretty small limit on the buffs and debuffs you can have. Because after all, it's not a heck of a lot of fun to go out there and just get loaded up with buffs and then get loaded up equally with debuffs as you're fighting. And that's not the game we're making.
Okay, I'm looking for a really good last question, but in the meantime, what is all the questioning about the Fianna with the moose? Am I missing something? What is the
Moose?
connection to a moose and a Fianna?
Moose.
Is this a lore thing?
What am I...
Do they like the
Do
hat?
they turn
Is it
into
a moose hat?
What?
I don't know.
Did we have a typo that said moose?
Is there
Don't think
moose and squirrel? Is there like a thing?
Moose
that
and
I'm
squirrel?
missing? Maybe.
Okay.
What is it? Okay. Okay.
Did they play Stump the
Last
Designer?
good questions, and then explain to me this moose connection.
If they're talking about a moose and a squirrel, I understand, but I don't understand the relevance to the character.
Heroes in Dark Age could turn into a moose for extra HP.
Oh, I see. I see
there
where
we
we're
go.
going.
Oh,
Got it.
that's where you're going.
There is
I was trying
there
to
is
think
no
of some-
turning into a moose.
There's no turning into a moose.
Um,
I was trying to figure out what we wrote
Yeah,
that
is
had to
a
do with
puka?
moose.
I was confused. Okay.
Thank you, Tim.
I wasn't even
Tim's
thinking.
laughing at all.
Yeah, it's funny because I wasn't even thinking of Dark Age.
Yeah.
I was just, moose. What did we do? Did they see, one of the moose,
I
thing
don't
we
know if it
have?
was a lore story somewhere. Okay, actual questions. Waiting for one. I mean, I can ask this one in the meantime. McCavity, will it be viable to make a tank character into more of a backline support character with a build that focuses mostly on reducing damage to allies, forcing the enemy to push their groups to attack the tank?
Not really. These are not really backline classes. These are very heavily frontline classes. You don't have a lot of abilities that are, I'm going to do something to someone else to make them better. That's sort of a support class thing. These guys really would like to be on the front line and actually having damage directed towards them as opposed to hiding and having other people try to get to them to inflict damage upon them.
Unless he means backline by staying, back and keeping, the squishies safer.
Yeah, you certainly could bodyguard if that was a thing that you wanted to do. And in some cases might be a really good thing, especially in smaller groups where you're going to have
Exactly.
that kind of a focus.
Exactly. So if that's what you meant, McCavity, if you meant more of a bodyguard role in the back line, yes. If you meant what Ben laid out earlier, no.
Apparently the hero was called Fianna in German, and that's why they're getting
I
this.
see.
Ah.
Okay. No, I'm not asking questions about coconuts and the Black Knight. All right, you have one more minute for a decent question. Well, okay. Can we possibly hire more programmers before the stretch goals reach to speed things up and continue to reach that stretch goal anyway?
Oh, yeah, we're trying.
I guess the question is, are those positions open now? I mean, they're not on the website or anything.
they're not on the website yet. We're working on that.
Okay.
But we already have 2 positions on the website still open, UI and senior gameplay. So yes, we're still looking. And when you use a headhunter, as we are, as well as using Anna to do her own headhunting, you don't always have to have something up on a website. In this case, the headhunter we're using knows exactly what we're looking for, and so is already started looking for 1 or 2 people to fill these asks.
There were a bunch of questions about this earlier, so we might as well end as we began, talking about the stealth stretch goal. There's questions about which aspect of that is going to be in launch, and just a clarification on that.
Oh, same thing we've said, right from the beginning. We would love to get all three in, for launch, but we're not expecting to get all three in for launch. We have said that we think that the scouts would be real easy or much easier, but not necessary. The use of the veil is something that won't be a great technical challenge. It will be just the balancing of these folks.
Yeah, we'll see what we can do. It would be nice, obviously, to have everything that we want for launch. But these are extenders or extender plus or however that was phrased for a reason. So we can't guarantee either way. Camouflage though, definitely in.
Correct.
Because that's part of the archers that are going to be in beta.
Correct. And I'm also hedging a little bit because I don't want to talk about anything with the reveals, ahead of time.
Yeah.
We still have 7 more to go, so sorry if I'm being a little bit more cagey. But 7 more to go. So before we go, a couple things. First, as usual, folks, let us know in chat. Thumbs up, thumbs down, on the trio.
All right, what do you think? Now you're all asking. Too late. Thumbs up or down? Up. Lots of up. Secrix must think he needs more info. Everyone else, up. Sideways. Okay. Gangsta.
Yeah. Well, as always, we'll enter and talk about these on the forum. There'll be a forum thread that we'll put up right after this to talk about this more for you guys there, and we will be talking about this stuff more next week. If you have any questions about this trio, you can squeeze them in the next Q&A, which is focused on the.
I don't know.
You don't know what letter?
No.
For next time?
No.
Nice
No
try.
idea.
It's up to you. You guys have to
Yeah,
decide what
no
letter.
idea.
We don't even know. So
Yeah.
so we'll be talking about something next week, and we don't
Yeah.
even know what it is. You guys have to go and vote, which the
Yeah.
vote will go out
Not
again.
psychic anymore. Don't have that power. But seriously. So, a couple of other things. First, again, a thank you. Stretch goal, fantastic. Met,
Yes.
great. Will be fun. This trio, we also think will be a lot of fun. Testing so far this week on chat has gone really nicely.
Well, nicely or not nicely, depending on if we want to
I
catch
guess.
that bug or not.
Yeah. So the good news is we haven't crashed. So it's now 72, maybe a little more than 72 hours since we opened up the chat server to our alpha beta IT guys, and nothing's gone bye-bye. Nothing's, ground to a halt. And so that's all good, even though we would like to find the bug, but there's a good chance that, Tim thinks we found, possibly, the root cause, but we'll see. Tonight, we are not going to have a Friday Night Fights, but we are going to leave the servers open. So it kind of amounts to the same thing. Our alpha, beta 1, and IT folks, absolutely, you're going to be able to play all weekend, at least until we crash. And then depending on what we find, if we crash, then we may either put the servers back up or just leave them down. But so far, again, nothing.
Haven't found out what happened yet. So
Yep.
Has to keep testing.
So that's bad and good. Good, of course, that the code is solid. I mean, again, 72 hours and still running beautifully. And we've had the chatbots in there to try to, speed things up in terms of a crash. So far, nothing. You folks have been in and out of it the last 3 days, nothing. So maybe over this weekend, get a slightly higher volume and see if it crashes. And if it doesn't, great. And if it does, that's good as well, because certainly we'll have more intel. Anything else?
Surveys. Surveys.
Oh, well, yes.
Yes.
Update going to go out probably 5 o'clock, maybe a little later. I'm almost finished with it. I had to wait, actually, until you guys gave us the thumbs up or thumbs down, so I could put in the update what our backers thought. Because if it had been a thumbs down, I would have had to rewrite that whole paragraph and say that, oh, they didn't like it, so we're in trouble with it. But that should go out in a couple hours. We've got lots of great artwork, a couple more screenshots from obviously in-game on Retouch screenshots, some new art that you folks haven't seen before. The surveys for the next class reveal will go out shortly. I know which one I'm hoping, but so far the ones I've hoped haven't been revealed. The ones I expected, at least 2 of them, were revealed. But I won't get you folks what my favorite is. Boy, anything else?
I think that's it.
I think that covers it. So, look, folks, as always, thank you very much, for your support. Thank you for the stretch goal. I'm glad from what we could see on the forums that you folks are also excited about the programmer stretch goal. One thing I mentioned in the update that has been asked, and I'll mention it again, I mentioned it at the beginning, I might as well mention it at the end. These programmers are additional programmers to the team. They're not programmers that we had initially in our plan. If we get, or when we get, the UI guy and another senior guy, these 2 guys are definitely more than we planned on having on the team for launch. It is just, I think, probably the best indication of how serious we are about getting this game done. And to quote myself from the update, not to make the once and future game. This is not this project is not something we want to extend for 5 years, 6 years before it launches.
Trying to make it launch sooner, not.
Yes, exactly. So these programmers are new ads, and also the reason that it's such a big stretch goal versus the last time for the senior programmers was that stretch goal was just for the fees and the additional salary to pay the senior programmers, and certainly the fees to the headhunter, which are considerable. So in this case, because there are 2 new team members, this is covering salary and everything else. So that's why it's so big. Okay, I'm done. You done?
All right. Yep, I think so.
Okay,
Awesome.
We're going to upload this to YouTube shortly, so if you missed the beginning or any part of it, you can watch it there, or you can watch it instantly on Twitch in our past broadcasts. So go there. And surveys, there are several threads on the forum, and if you happen to have a problem with survey, please check your spam folder first, and then you can contact us there if you should. But hopefully you'll vote. We get to see your results next week. Yay! Okay, thank you, everyone.